What was your I don't get paid enough for this moment at work? My boss insisted that everybody be at their desks at 8:30 sharp. She made me take roll on an attendance sheet and hand it into her every day. She also made me do it at lunchtime, when everybody left and came back, and when they left at night. Took roll for a bunch of adults 3 times a day. I don't work there anymore. I worked in SROs in the middle of the roughest part of my city. I frequently have to identify drug dealers, report them, get them banned, and then enforce the ban. I get threatened by them a lot, usually just with fists or knives. I don't mind that so much. If they come at me with a knife, then the cops actually bust them and then they're out of my hair for good. Well, one guy just kind of laughed at me and said I'd regret it if I kept getting in his way. Which people say, though usually more aggressively, and I don't put much stock into it. Then he gave me his name and just told me to Google him. Turns out he's the son of one of the more violent crime families in the area. They're connected to like 40 targeted killings, and a lot of them are guys like me getting gunned down in parking lots. At that point I backed the duck off. $20 an hour is not enough to fight the ducking mob. Edit. Because apparently people don't know what an SRO is and are angry about it. Single room occupancy. Worked at a fast food place about 13 years ago. This lady in the drive-thru claimed she was missing a sandwich. Our policy was to ask for the bags back to verify. I asked to see the bags, 3 or 4. Decent sized order, and instead of handing them back like a civilized human being, she instantly started raging and throwing the food into the window while cutting me out. Guess what one of the items that she threw at me was? Yep, said missing sandwich. Direct support staff for people with minor disabilities. 13 an hour. Had a client go off the rails because he refused to take schizophrenia pills. Was working night shift and he gets up in the middle of the night and starts yelling random things, running around the house naked, peeing on everything, asking for me to put a cowboy hat on him. He is now in a nursing home, bless his soul. Edit. Yes, he got his cowboy hat LMAO. The time I went to sleep under my desk at work at 5 AM because I needed to be back at my desk for an 8 AM call. I had promised myself a long time ago that I would never sleep under my desk. I would go home, or just work straight through, but I wouldn't do that. I only lived a 12-minute walk home. That night I realized that getting those extra 24 minutes of sleep were worth not going home. I was so sad about it. I am a corporate lawyer. We had been working, literally, around the clock for days on a deal that was going sideways. This was a Wednesday more than a Thursday morning, but I had been there until 3 AM Sunday night, 5 AM Monday night, 6 AM Tuesday night, and had been back in the office by 9 AM every day. That's when I knew I needed to quit, but I'm still here a year and change later. Oops. I walked into the bathroom, and someone had smeared poop on literally every single surface, wall, everything except one small part of the ceiling they couldn't reach. Picasso almost made me quit, but luckily my boss told me to lock it, not let anyone else use it, and he got someone to come with a pressure washer. Posted before. This was back in the late 90s. I was working at Walmart as my first job as a teenager. I was floated to the garden department one day and there was a guy looking at lawn fertilizer. I walked over and asked if he needs help. He said not now, just looking at the different kinds you have. Pretty standard reply from the guy. So I said okay, let me know. I walk away, and then swing back about 5 minutes later. Same guy has proceeded to rip open about 10 different kinds of the fertilizer all over the ground and is rolling around in the stuff. He is also taste sampling the stuff. I called my manager because I did not want to deal with it. Security escorted the guy out the store and called an ambulance in case the ingestion of the fertilizer hurt him. Used to work as a dental nurse. First patient of the friggin' day. Bloke said he felt sick after having a local anesthetic. He looked it. I grabbed the bin and told him if he needed to vomit, take the bin. He held it in his lap and turned, vomiting down the side of the chair and all over my pants and shoes. Of course I had to clean it up and of course they wouldn't let me go home to change. Having to listen to a child scream his head off because the father insisted on injection instead of the calming drug we usually use for kids that small. Asshole father. That kid is going to be scared of the dentist for a long time, if not for life. I don't think you understand what a contract means. Besides, this is an opportunity for you. When the new manager tried to move me to night shifts weekend from my day shifts working days despite my contract being very specific about when I worked. Hey, you were right. This is a big opportunity for me, was how I opened when I told her I was quitting. The look of shock and 15 minutes of silence on her part were hilarious and the best feeling interval of my entire life when she realized I had thrown her own stupid words back at her. I work in childcare. There was one time we had one kid who had a diaper blowout and one kid who puked everywhere. There's only 2 teachers, so one has to handle the blowout and one the vomit, while also keeping the rest of the kids away from it all. I manage a fast food restaurant and for me it's always things that have to do with the bathroom. From having to clean up porn magazines WC men on the floor or walls, to people either purposely shying on the floor, even used hypodermic needles. Working at Target on Black Friday in the back room without anyone else to help me pull the product and getting told I am not keeping up. Weird how I got sick 2 hours into my volunteered 12-8 shift. I was working late, like 2 AM in the office. My manager said let's go to the convenience store to buy some snacks and smokes. She sits in the back and we drive there. After we get it, she says can we swing by this street intersection real quick. When we get to that intersection, I guess she sees a car that belongs to someone she knows, parked in front of her boyfriend's house. She starts to wail, cry and kick around in the back seat, while my bewildered ass just holds the steering wheel, with a stupid look on my face. After 20 minutes of that we drive back to the office. I drop her off and I go home. WTF. My mother was moving interstate with my father and it was the last time I'd see either of my parents for months. I was 18 and just graduated school. I explained this to my boss but he just said I would have to see her another time because he needed a fence put up over the weekend. I told him I was leaving either way and he could put his own fence up. I quit soon after that. He also accused me of lying and berated me multiple times for random things that I either didn't do and refusing to pay me for weeks at a time. When a clarinet came across my bench that someone had jizzed in. When I found a dead mouse in a Bari sax. When people think duct tape or superglue is an acceptable substitute for soldering parts together. When people use superglue on their instruments. Period. Was working the registers at a grocery store. About an hour before closing, a customer comes to my lane with 2 48CT egg cartons. Stumbles a bit putting them onto the belt, and before I can react the entire thing was on the ground. Best part? Apparently the janitor had left already, so I got to spend the next hour cleaning up 96 broken eggs with nothing but paper towels. When I worked at McDonald's, I found out we didn't get paid for closing. We got paid until the store closed. So if it took us an extra hour or 2 to close, that wasn't paid. I wish I knew what I know now, because that is an open and shut case. But at the time, I was young and dumb. My first paycheck, I noticed I had a ton of missing hours. So when I asked my boss about it, she told me we only get paid until the store closed. So that night, I walked out when the store closed. They tried to guilt me into staying, because the other team members need me duck. That, I don't work for free. Sorry, especially when I'm already making minimum wage. No thanks. Not gonna happen. Doing landscaping during the summers while in college. I rolled up a long piece of sod I had just cut and placed it in a wheelbarrow. When I turned back around, there's a copperhead sitting in the wheelbarrow giving me the stank eye. Apparently I had rolled a copperhead up in the sod and carried it to the wheelbarrow before he was able to get out. I ended up having to kill 4 copperheads that day. A few years into my flying career, so definitely not earning what people think pilots earn, I was asked to take a bunch of handicapped children and their carers for a 10-minute flight in a small twin-prop aircraft. All seemed to be going well until after landing, when I smelled the unmistakable stench of vomit. I looked around and all the passengers were looking horrified, as the inside of the plane had been covered in what, I was told, used to be strawberry milkshake. I then had to vacuum and wash down the carpet in the plane. The vacuum died after picking up a large amount of this lumpy white substance and it started to drip back down the nozzle. It was a warm day and that didn't make the smell any better. I mentioned the handicapped thing not because I'm an awful person, but because his learning disability meant he didn't think to inform his carer of his nausea, so there was no attempt to reach for the sick bag. I work in security, and a bit under a year ago, I worked at some kind of public TV event. My job was to keep people without passes out of a specific area which was intended for those working behind the scenes to kick back and relax and get their lunches and all that. Anyway, only ones I was allowed entrance were people with passes and other security folks. But then word from above came that the exception was to be made for some kind of supposedly famous child music group. I had no clue what they looked like. So 4 kids and their parents walk up and I stop them. Don't you know WHO, these are quickly followed. Eventually it got cleared up. And every time after they kept bringing in more friends and family members and the same song and dance continued. You had a metal bolt thrown at me while teaching 13-year-olds. It missed, but it could really have hurt me. I'm not the best teacher, not by a long mile, but I don't deserve that kind of duckery. When I saw how disingenuous the pricing system and upselling tactics encouraged by the boss were, when customers' faces fell when they realized how much their final bill was, on top already having paid the not insignificant package price of the service up front, and how cheated they felt when we were told to not place too much importance on getting customers to come back because our service wasn't something people get done regularly, in defense of their prices. When the boss set up part of the store 3 years ago for retail but never considered inventory management, and my manager got mad at me for trying to make an inventory list even though I was asked to by someone at head office, and the warehouse was a mess of old unsold goods gathering dust. When I was told I had shifts at another branch about 1.5 hours drive away despite it never being mentioned in the job ad or during the interview, and finding out I had to pay for parking even as an employee, when I was bullied to tears. When co-workers told me everyone's got a story of the boss bullying them to tears. When I realized it didn't matter if the job was almost everything I'd wished for if I felt like a ratty person at the end of the day. Also, I was being paid just above minimum wage for work spanning a few unrelated skill sets. So, duck that. I was being sent all over the province to give leaflets to people. We're talking about an average of 4 hours of travel and 3 or 4 different bus and trains per day to get there and back home. I tried to tell my boss if they could just tell me where I wasn't supposed to go because we'd already left leaflets there, but they insisted I just kept going to that specific part of the province, and said that they were going to keep sending me there and further north, which meant that I was gonna spend even more time per day traveling. To walk 4 hours and hours for €300 and 50 cents per correctly delivered leaflet. I called them and said, look, this isn't gonna cut it. I'm not gonna waste your time. I quit. They told me, well, you're gonna travel 4 hours anyway, but I quit nonetheless. I now travel a grand total of 20 minutes of trains per day. Who's traveling 4 hours now? Suckers? Weird one. And not horrible, but made me just want to go duck and puke. I was the cashier. Old guy, probably a doctor, snaps at me when I happily share the amount he owes. He fiddles with his cards, then cash, the cards. Finally hands me 2 20s, $16.83 change. Fine. I count it out and hand it to him gently so as not to drop the cash, change and the receipt. After, he stands there and says, I want to ask you a question. Do they train you to handle change that way? I handed him the bills, receipt, then change, all the while making sure he had it in hand properly and politely. I said I never even thought of it before. It's pretty much common courtesy. He said, well, in my logical mind, it's change first, then bills, then receipt. You know, the weight of it. I said cool. I'm mindful of that. Good idea. He then wants to shake my hand. He gives me the death grip, squeezing like a mother ducker. I reciprocate. Nicely. Up goes his pinky knuckle. He lets go mortified and marches out of the store. I think I broke a doctor's pinky knuckle and now I'm wondering if I owe the store, or both will get sued. Psycho camp director lost her it on all of the lifeguards because we said we weren't coming back next summer. Reality was we all had legit reasons. I was going to take summer courses to graduate early. Another guard was moving to university and was going to work in that city. Another guard got offered a head guard spot at a camp near her house. etc. Nothing that said we hated the current camp. Just other things going on. We were told in a group meeting if we weren't happy that we could leave and she would find other guards. Following Friday she calls us all in to tell us what a great job we are doing and how happy everyone is going to the lake. Tuesday after that she calls us in individually to tell us we aren't working hard enough and she sees us slacking off all the time. Lunchtime Tuesday all the guards walked into her office, told her to go duck herself in front of the owner of the camp, and we all piled into my Ford Focus and went for beer. Went home that night to message from camp owner asking us to give him a call back. We all chatted and realized he had called all of us. Called him the following day. Told him what went down. He asked us to reconsider and that he would give us a $5 an hour raise and report directly to him. We discussed it and agreed on the condition that Psycho Director apologized to us at a collective staff meeting. She refused and had a tantrum. Camp owner fired her on the spot, escorted her off the property and we opened the lake back up. Duck you Bob. Edit. Wow, my first silver. Thank you. Bob finally got me something worthwhile. When I walked into the room of a confused patient on blood thinners who had ripped out his IV and catheter and had it and blood on every surface of his room, it looked like a murder had been committed. I've been through a lot as a nurse, but that was like going into a war zone. I have to render at least 3 hours of OT to get everything done within the deadline and we get no OT or holiday pay. When I was told I needed to be nice and stop causing problems because I had reported a new employee, who happened to be friends with the boss, for racism against our Hispanic employees, I could forget all the sexual assault, the literally having another employee bite my ass, the antisemitism toward me, but I will not put up with some guy coming in and being racist to the people I work with. An old job they decided to decrease hours but keep the 2-for-1 burger pizza deal on, meaning I'd spend 12 hours in a basement kitchen by myself trying to cook burgers, roll out pizza doughs and do the KP work at the same time. I worked for the university's horse barn as a teenager. They had some pretty strict rules that I was not used to at other places, like the horses were only allowed outside for 2 hours, no matter what. Could be the most beautiful day and we would have to stop everything we were doing to bring them into their stalls. They were only ever allowed 2 squirts of fly spray, which didn't cover their butts, required to have their halters on 24/7, even when in the stalls at night. Our boss had clearly zero experience with animals, or if he did he just didn't care. One day while one of the horses was having his feet trimmed, my boss went to pull out a weed whacker from the bottom of the shelf directly next to where the horse was standing. A lot like Jenga, the entire closet of machinery fell onto the horse, causing him to kick the farrier and run. Ever since that incident the horse was a mess. So instead of hiring a trainer to fix the problem, they just locked him in the stall, all day 24/7. I quit shortly after that. I still wonder how that horse is doing. When I was working as a cashier at Borders, I threw my back out one day. I was in a lot of pain and there was only one position I could be in that didn't cause me pain. I had been working there for like 5 months at that point and had never taken a day off. So I figured it was about time and I called in to let them know I wouldn't be coming in the next day because I hurt my back and I was going see a doctor. My manager's response was, "Can't you just take a couple of Tylenol and come in anyway? We need you." Duck that. I was not going to come in and be miserable in pain at that job. So I said no and reminded her it was my first day off. Her response to that was that she was disappointed because she thought I was a team player. I make $13 an hour on an ambulance every day and I don't get paid enough for this moment. 1. When I hired an engineer and he started at a higher salary than me. 2. When we hired my sister and she started at much more than me, even though she knew nothing about the company. Aka, the 2 times I got a raise. I work from home as a freelance content writer and it's a pretty relaxing gig most of the time. But every now and then, I get a client that will constantly bug me for updates 2 to 3 times a day. I usually drop the contract when they get on my nerves, since they're not worth the stress and anxiety. Working retail at a smaller hardware store, my boss called me on my first weekend off in 3 months to ask me how to process a transaction because he had no idea. Wanted me to walk him through it over the phone while the customer was waiting. When I worked front desk in a residential building and one of the residents came to me and said the devil was in his apartment, then proceeded to stand 2 feet from me and start praying Muslim style, which he wasn't, only to get up and walk away like nothing happened. He had a look in his eyes I'll never forget, and I was sure he was gonna do something to me. I never called 911, so ducking fast. Turns out he was high on K2. When I was 15 and working at McDonald's, someone dropped their colostomy bag in the bathroom, causing what can only be described as a massive it explosion. Guess who got paid $6 an hour to clean that up? It was on the ducting ceiling. IT was everywhere. A dog at the daycare I worked at was a little too excited and his D got stuck outside its case. For lack of better terminology, I had to go buy a lube for him. Having to work a 12-hour overnight shift on a Friday in addition to working my full week of hours. This happened for a whole month. BC my company at the time didn't see hiring someone for that shift as a priority. I was a manager of a remote location. My former boss is a D, hence why former.